Thanks everyone for joining us today. Hello and welcome to the Stephen and Peter Sachs Museum. I'm Neshka Pfeiffer. I'm the Sachs Museum Curator and your host and moderator for the Botanical Resonance online artist talk series, which is brought to you by the Missouri Botanical Garden and the exhibition sponsors, Nancy and Kenneth Kransberg, the Thomas A. Kiumjian Family Foundation, and Tony and Cindy Kiumjian. Today's presentation by artist Brooke Erin Goldstein offers a look into her creative process in designing the quilted room installation Reverberations for the exhibition currently on view at the Sachs Museum, Botanical Resonance, Plants and Sounds in the Garden. Today's talk will be about 15 minutes with time for Q&A after Brooke's presentation. We're able to offer accessibility features, including ASL interpretation and live captioning, which you can access via the closed caption button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. To turn off or for more options, just click on that feature. Today's program will be recorded and posted on the Missouri Botanical Gardens YouTube channel in the coming weeks. Brooke Erin Goldstein is an artist and curator living and working in the greater Providence, Rhode Island area. She was born in New City, New York, and began taking art and sewing classes at the age of 3. She's a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design with a degree in textiles. Her creative professional career started with her work as a technical textiles and service designer in the apparel industry. Brooke currently sits on the exhibition committee as an advisory member at the Jamestown Art Center and previously headed the Rhode Island Jewish Museum Exhibition Committee. She has road tripped through all the continental U.S. states except for Nebraska and likens the changing landscape to her love of surface design. Her main focus in her artwork is quilted room installations, providing an emotional and tactile experience for visitors all around the nation and hopefully one day all around the world. Brooke, thank you so much for creating this wonderful artwork for our visitors and for being with us today to talk about your process.
Oh, thank you all for having me so much. I'm really excited to share with you guys and give you a behind the scenes look. So yeah, if we want to advance to the first slide, we can get started. So it starts with an empty room. All of the installations I've done, included this one, are site specific, designed specifically for the rooms that they are in. And I like to spend a lot of time, or as much time as I can, in the space, getting a feel for the space. My partner who assists me, we take a lot of measurements. Even when the organization provides us with measurements, we take our own measurements. Typically, the spaces that we're working in are older historic buildings and are slightly quirky. So I like to know every changed angle, all the imperfections, the beautiful imperfections, as you would say, and that takes some time. I also typically spending time in this space allows me to visualize what I want the piece to feel like, and that's just a very visceral experience for me, and I hope it translates into a visceral experience for the people that come and see the work. So yeah, we can advance to the next slide. So when Nezhka first approached me about this show, I immediately thought of tree roots. And what's that book? I think it's called either The Private Life of Plants or The Secret Life of Plants. I can figure that out later. I think Nezhka probably knows. But yeah, where they talk about the wood wide web and how trees actually communicate with each other. One of the things that's really interesting too is not just that trees send vibrational signals through the fungal system, but also that they can hear. They can hear where water is, so they can grow their roots towards water. And it's all really about their community. They can also fight, which is very interesting, and share resources, but also keep resources from each other, which is very interesting. One of the places that actually the part of the garden that I love the most is the stumpery. And if any of you are local to St. Louis and haven't gotten a chance to see it, or are traveling to St. Louis and are gonna go to the garden, please visit the stumpery. It's a small part of the garden, but to me, it's just so awe-inspiring. And that's what these pictures are. Most of these pictures, I forget what kind of tree that is on the left. Neshka might put it in the chat, but the rest of the photos are from the stumpery. And I just love how it looks so natural yet alien, like it's from another world, but it's very much from our world in, this under the soil, what we don't see. So we can advance the next slide. So here are screaming grasses. So yeah, so again, when Neshka approached me, I immediately thought of the tree roots, but also this fact that I had just known, like almost as a trivia point, that the smell that's emitted by cut grass is actually a scream and distress signal, to warn other grasses that a threat is coming. And the last installation I did was actually focused on synesthesia, which is about the mixing of senses. It's a human experience, I guess, where some people will be able to, smell colors or see sound, things like that, where your senses get mixed up. And so I thought that's kind of a synesthesic aspect to how grass exists as a community. In the lower right-hand corner, you can see a picture of me screaming. I did take that of myself. I took a few screaming pictures so that I could get practice that ghostly scream shape, because when you're painting on fabric, you sort of need your body to be able to just do things automatically, because you can't make mistakes. There's no erasing, there's no lifting the paint. As you know from staining your clothes, once it's on there, it's on there. So I have to be very practiced and deliberate when I'm painting on the fabrics if I want a specific shape. And I really wanted that kind of ghostly scream shape. So yeah, here we are with the drawings. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner, my sketchbooks drawings start very crude. They're really just, a way for me to get out my ideas. It's essentially like note taking. And then in the lower left-hand corner, you can see my measurement notes from visiting the space. And you can see how I measure where all the, what I call cutouts, need to be. So things for like the fire alarm and other, the thermostat and things like that, or any switches that you might need. So I have to cut those out of the piece. And then on the right-hand side, you can see my concept drawings that I sent to Nezhka that show you sort of what I'm thinking and what the piece is eventually going to look like. Next slide. So here is where I took my concept drawings and mocked them up into the space. So this is again for Nezhka, and potentially like marketing materials or fundraising, so that because all of this work is commissioned specifically for this show, it doesn't exist to take photographs of. So these mock-ups are really helpful in allowing anyone who needs to, prior to the show opening, see what the space is going to look and feel like. Next slide. So yeah, and here are my schematics. You can see again in the lower left-hand corner more of my measurements, my specific measurements. I'm sorry, in the lower right-hand corner. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see the stacks of each panel gets its own schematic. I like to do things by hand. You could do this on the computer. It's all on grid paper by hand. And I have tracing paper for anything that's going to be appliqued on top. I put on tracing paper. Anything that's going to be in the sewn patchwork goes directly on the grid. And this is how I make sure everything's going to fit together nicely and really get a feel for, how the piece is going to be actually established and made. Because that process is probably one of the longer processes. And this takes about a month to really get everything gridded out, sometimes 6 weeks or longer. Next slide. So yeah, and here the most labor intensive part, believe it or not, is the cutting. I do not get anything laser cut. Everything is cut by hand, partially because, you know, what I'm interested in these quilted rooms, other than being able to create like a really immersive experience, is the labor of it all. You know, when you go to see like a ballet performance or figure skating, the labor is supposed to be hidden from you. And I think there's really something very human and interesting, especially in a visual art experience, to show the labor and the duration. And I think when you see, and I trace everything in permanent marker, so you can really see, that this is all hand cut, hand drawn. In the bottom left hand corner, I have to, these projects take about a year, so I really have to plan out backwards from, the finished product to now to make sure I can stay on track. You can see the kind of yellow stencils that I use. I typically don't do things the quote right way when it comes to quilting. In quilting, and Devin, just stay on this slide for a little bit. But in quilting, you're supposed to everything's supposed to end up as a square. So what you would do is, if you wanted to make essentially like a mosaic quilt, you would either have appliques on top, or you would sort of break everything up into a square, sort of sew parts into that square, and then sew a bunch of squares together. I don't do that. What I do is I create the geometry with the stencils that is going to fit together, so that there's no lines where I don't want them to be, because I look at the patchwork lines and the quilting lines almost as a drawing. And I don't want to break up the color with unnecessary lines. So I do something that wouldn't really work in a functional product quilt, but I really think it works very well in a visual arts experience. Next slide. So yeah, this is the painting. So typically painting happens in layers. On the left, you can see me painting all the little grass lines, and then on the right, you can see me hanging them up to dry. And I have to, if you can see little Post-its that have letters on them that are crossed off. All the quilts are lettered rather than numbered, because we're using so many numbers for the measurements that you don't want to get confused. So I letter them, so then I can keep each panel separate and not get them confused. In the middle, you can see me doing a technique where I know I'm going to applique something on top of that, the flowers. So I'm actually painting around a stencil so that I know I can then applique those flowers in later, and there's going to be the proper amount of space. Next. So yeah, I put a million slides of this in so you can show how much the duration of the endless pinning really is. It's just a lot of lining things up, a lot of pinning. And because I don't do things kind of the quote right way, the way you're supposed to make a quilt, I really need to make sure things are pinned. Whereas if you're just sewing squares together, you don't always kind of have to pin them. You can sort of like line them up or clip them. So there's just hours upon hours of pinning. As you can see, I'm, in my pajamas and robes sometimes. In the morning before work, I'm doing this all over the place. So really, because I do have to, have other jobs to help pay the bills other than my artwork, I have to fit this in when I can, and it's just very labor intensive. Next slide. Yeah, and it's the same thing with the sewing. It's really like night and day. I do prefer most of the time to stand when I sew. I prefer to stand when I paint, sew, draw for the most part. That's just so I have a bunch of standing desks. I also have folding tables, as you can see in some of the pictures. I have multiple machines set up. I currently have 6 machines that I use. Most of them just kind of home machines, but on the heavy duty side, and 1 industrial machine. Next slide. Yeah, labor. So I just wanted to be real with you guys. This is very labor intensive and it's exhausting and, can be very hard on your body and emotionally difficult. This usually happens sometimes in the middle of the process, which takes, usually about a year. So, 6, 8 months in where you just hit a wall and you have to find it in you to keep going, because you want to see it come together. And I really believe in this work. It's physically demanding. And I do a lot of yoga and stretching and physical exercise to make sure my body can handle this. But yeah, it's a very grueling process. And I think, my grandfather used to say, I'm Jewish, and specifically making latkes, if there's not blood, sweat, and tears in it, you didn't do it right. And I kind of feel that way about the installations. If there's not blood, sweat, and tears in it, you probably didn't do it right. So next slide. Yeah. Applique. So this is kind of where we get to the sort of the fun part, the finishing in the applique. So what was cool about this piece is the roots are actually appliqued behind and above, which was kind of neat and an interesting process that I'd never done before. I've been wanting to work with sheer fabrics for a really long time because I think there's something cool about showing the batting underneath, really showing like all the layers. And I think the batting kind of makes it look textural like dirt, which was really cool. And then the flowers applique on top. And yeah, it's just, this is more of a fun part, but it also is very physically demanding because I do not have a long arm quilting machine as of yet. So I have to do these on my home and smaller industrial machines. And yeah, you have to really squeeze that fabric. You're almost wringing it out like a towel to kind of get it under the needle and get this all done with the big panel. So, but this is one of the more fun parts. Yeah, so we're back to so that Juki is my one industrial machine. So I do the finishing on that. And if you look closely, the orange is the back side of that panel. You can see I don't finish the edges of the quilts the way you're supposed to. Typically quilts will have a border. I don't want a border because I want this to be a seamless experience coming together. So I actually just fold, I serge the edges and then fold them and just sew them behind. And so that's again another thing I do, quote, wrong, but is right for the space. And then you can see on the right that this is just testing. We make a panel. That's my hallway to the entryway of my house. Just using any space I can to see this through. In every installation I've done, the ceilings in my home have never been tall enough. So you can see it's bunching at the end. Typically gallery ceilings are a lot higher. So I never actually see the piece until it's, fully until it's installed like you guys do. So yeah, and here's the install. That's my partner, Steve, up in the corner. But yeah, and so we create, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner, we create sort of this hanging bar system. I put tabs on the back of all the quilts so they drape. I like it to have about typically about 2 inches off the wall because it gives it kind of a beautiful drape. But on top of that, I think it creates the atmosphere. If any of you listen to the NPR piece, they talk about how the room has like almost like a different feel, a different sound, a different climate. The quilts on the walls really just change how the room feels. And I love that. And so the hanging bar system is part of what makes that happen. Yeah, trash bags we use. We transport the art in trash bags. I started that in college, with textile work. And me and my roommate would always put tape on it, all the trash bags, not trash, art, not trash, No, but yeah, and then in the lower left-hand corner, you can see the schematics for how we break up the bar system, because we do have to figure out how it's all going to work together. And it's that's also a quite intensive process. So yeah, and here are some panoramics of the finished piece. Me and Neshka and our mask going through everything, doing the lighting. lighting is not my strong point. So I thank typically my curators and gallerists for help with that. But yeah, I mean, I think this, I'm really happy with the way this piece came together. And I hope those of you who have been able to see it in person have enjoyed it too. But and if anybody hasn't seen it in person and gets a chance to visit the garden and the museum, you know, I hope you enjoy not only this, but the rest of the show. Kevin and Annika's work are really amazing. And I'm just really honored to be in such good company and in such a dynamic show. Next slide. Yeah, so this is just for fun. I thought I'd give you all a little look into my studio. So this is the room I'm in now. We call it the performance studio, but I don't do much performance work. I do some of it, but it's typically the wide open space that's very changeable. Open and closed tables. You can see my yoga hammocks there for when I need to stretch out my back and hang upside down. And in the left, you can see that's my new system of clipboards. Instead of folders, when I finish a piece, I put everything in the folders, but I'm usually working on more than one piece at a time, or have a bunch of ideas that I may want to get to later. So the clipboards are really great for me to keep in mind everything I'm interested in, because sometimes you hit a wall with one project, but you still want to get something done. And so it's good to shift to another. So I'm really enjoying that clipboard system. In the upper right, you can see a piece I'm working on now that's for a quilted painting. So you can kind of see the border is the edges that wrap around, sort of like it's like I got a stretched canvas look. And then you can see I'm sort of building the surface on top. And that's going to be a piece about loneliness that I designed during the pandemic and some of the loneliness we were all kind of experiencing. Next slide. So yeah, this is the sewing studio, or we call the sewing studio, and also my storage. The number one question Neshka got through the run of the show so far is, what does she do with this when they're done? Well, you can see that in the left. That closet is a cedar closet, and that's a bunch of quilted rooms that you're looking at, folded up in soft trunks. And yeah, that's where they end up. I don't know, maybe someday I'll cut them all apart and make them into paintings or do something different with them. But yeah, right now that's where they stand. And then you can see my sort of sewing setup and my painting setup. And, you know, I'm really fortunate to have my studio in my home. And, you know, my partner and I were really fortunate to find an affordable home with 5 bedrooms. So we both have our studios in the home, and it works out really well. Yeah, I think we can do some Q&A now.
Fabulous, Brooke. Thank you so much. I really can't, I mean, it's really wonderful how much you were able to show of the process of this particular work, but obviously the way you generally work, and all of your working spaces at home. I have a quick question for you just before anyone else wants to drop any questions in the Q&A box.
Want to advance to the next slide though with the information, the closing
Oh
information?
yeah. Thank you. Thanks for remembering that. I think this was the book you may have mentioned, The Hidden Life of Trees, What They
Yes.
Feel, How They Communicate, Discoveries from a Secret World. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
By Peter Wolleben. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. He's written a handful of books that are all kind of about the underseen part of the world, and plants specifically, and trees. And I think that's what I wanted to ask you about, was, you know, often you are visualizing things that are not seen, right? So did you immediately think of going underground, or because you talked quite a bit about the scream and the above ground, what sort of brought you to that sort of bisected view that you came to design?
Well, actually, that's interesting. Yeah, completely absent of this project years and years ago. This has to be over 10 years ago. I had this idea, I forgot what I was calling it. It's in one of my notebooks, about doing almost like a storefront window where like a hanging and quilted installation that was like 3-dimensional, where you see underground and above ground. I never got the chance to do that piece. But so when you were talking about, you know, when you approached me, I immediately kind of thought about that, because I've always wanted to sort of do that. And one of the other installations I did that was more about human relationships and what we don't see was called Behind Open Doors, where I did a lot of house facades and then painted over them. I quilted the same house facade over and over again, and I painted over them with different things going on. Like there was, if there's hoarding in the house, there's just was painted a bunch of boxes in it. If there was abuse in the house, there was painted a bunch of bruises, and so I've always kind of been interested in sort of airing what we don't see and what we don't talk about. I think that allows us to experience more empathy and be closer to each other and feel less alone, which is something I'm very passionate about. Did I
Thank
answer the
you.
question? Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. As always, you
Yeah. Oh,
always
I
articulate.
do also have a funny story about the hidden lives of trees. I bought the audiobook. I'm dyslexic, so reading a book is very difficult for me. It's very fatiguing. So I typically do podcasts and audiobooks. And the narration, I don't know if it's the author narrating it or not. I can't remember, but the narration is so beautiful and calming. I was trying to listen to it while I drove, and I was like, I can't listen to this. It's gonna put me to sleep.
That's
So,
great. Oh my
but
gosh.
it's a really fascinating book. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I agree. I have read it as well, and I totally concur on that. And I did drop the title in the chat box for those of you who are able to access it. We do have a couple questions. Charlie asks, do you have any pieces on permanent exhibits?
I do, not permanent exhibit, but I do have a piece that is currently up right now in the Newport Art Museum that was purchased by them in their permanent collection. It's one panel of a large piece I did for them maybe 5.5 years ago. Oh God, why am I blanking on the name of that installation? It was a good name too. It'll come to me later in the talk, but yeah, that's currently up at the Newport Art Museum, and that is part of their permanent collection. And it was just in another show. So right now it's up in a textile show. And months ago, it was up in their recent acquisitions, and it was hanging 2 pieces down from a Warhol and 3 pieces down from a Sargent. So I'm very proud of that.
Very, very cool. Rhonda just happens to ask, how long will the display be currently at the Sax Museum? And I just want to let everybody know it's on view until March 31st of 2023. But after that, it will get packed up immediately, actually. So make sure to come and see it. When I do send out the recording, I will send links to our virtual tour so you can access it, and also some of the blog posts that feature images of the piece. Another person asks, have you considered working on the floor and or ceiling to expand beyond the limitation of wall work?
Yeah, I have worked on the floor a bit, and I like to work on the ceiling. The issue with the ceiling is typically there's a lot of issues with working on the ceilings with a lot of vents, but then also sprinkler systems. And so there can be issues with working on the ceiling. I've had issues in the past with fire marshal, regulations. So, and I have had to, there's some fireproof sprays that you can buy to create fireproofing. Also, physically we've hung from the ceiling. It's more challenging. Most spaces don't, especially if you're working in a historic space, the studs might not be 16 on center. And so it's harder to screw into the studs, find out where that stuff is. So it can be a challenge, but one day I would really like to work on the ceiling. And I've actually been thinking about creating some freestanding structures for outdoor experiences. I'm still really like marinating on that. Because I would have to build essentially a room structure outside. So, it's complicated, but it's definitely something that's on my mind.
Also, for someone mentions that the Newport show is called Social Fabric at the Newport Art
Thank you.
Museum.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
And the original installation was called From Black to Blue Skies and Everything in Between.
Oh, brilliant. Very good. Gloria asks, what types of fabrics do you use, or fibers?
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question. The vast majority of the fabrics that I use are reclaimed soft goods. So mostly bed sheets, vintage bed sheets, old curtains. I've even used doilies, napkins, things like that. I think there's a nostalgic quality to it that I really like. I like repurposing, but also, I don't know, there's something about sort of outing myself, right? Like, so I like to keep elements of that in the final pieces. So if you look around the room, you might see like a tag from a bed sheet, or the fold of the bed sheet, like a flat sheet, how it has that fold and seam. I leave those things in. I find it charming and fun, and it's, when we're creating an installation specifically, but any really visual art, like it's all kind of an illusion. It's a bit of a magic trick, and so I like to kind of, break the trick and just show you what it is. But yeah, most of it is vintage bed sheets, or what we call mill ends. I'm from Providence, Rhode Island. It's a mill town. And so there's really great places where you can buy cheaper fabrics that are sort of either irregular or have staining on them or messed up, or just portions that just didn't sell in a big batch. So you can get them for cheaper, which sort of like, all of this is also, not just send out of repurposing, but also affordability. I'm an artist. We don't make tons of money, my partner and I. So we have to be very economical about how we do things.
Um, thank you. Rhonda also kind of asks a little bit more of a follow-up question to that. Are all the fabrics painted, or do you also use prints, and how do you choose those?
Sometimes I use prints. If I use prints, I like to paint over it or paint into it. Most of the fabric is painted or manipulated in some way, at this point. I mean, for the most part, but yeah, I like to, it's fun to print on print is always fun. I love repeating pattern. It's just one of my favorite things. It's really what brought me into textiles in the first place, is color and repeating patterns. So it's always fun to take what somebody else has made and add more layers to it.
Molly has a great question as well. She says, so inspiring. Your technical skills are incredible. Do you find yourself experimenting with new techniques, or do you like to focus on perfecting your skill set?
Yeah, I'm trying to work that into my process, to add time of experimentation. So, what I've been doing is I'm really trying to do a quilted room every other year instead of trying to line up one like every year. Or there was one year technically I did 3 rooms and it almost killed me. But yeah, so I'm trying to work in more experimentation so, I can move things forward. I also take a lot of breaks, and this is sort of a time where I've been trying to experiment. One of the things that was experimental for this piece was the way I did those cut grass panels was a reduction stencil, which I'd never done before. So I started with a rectangle, and then I kept taking an inch off of, each one of the sides to create that triangular shape. And I really didn't know if the geometry would work out, and it did, thank goodness. So I think I'll use that again. But yeah, I'm trying to work more in I'm trying to really build that into my process and think about, really strategize how I can do this sustainably long term, and keep it fresh.
Awesome. Carmen has a great comment. Brooke, seeing what you do behind the scenes has been amazing. I love that you use the stumpery as inspiration, as it's a place in the garden not many people venture out to see. You mentioned you're working on a piece about loneliness. Are you able to share when and where we can see your work?
Yeah, so that one, I don't have a show lined up for that. The next show I'm gonna have, it's just gonna be, like a small little, like, I guess it's kind of a mini installation, and it's gonna be in the Providence train station, what's called the PVD Metro Gallery, and that's gonna be a piece about time and space. And it's just gonna be a long, about 17 feet by 3 foot sort of panel. So that's next. The piece about loneliness. So that's a series of quilted paintings that, I'm creating, that I don't really have a gallery lined up or anything like that. I'm just sort of creating them, and then I'll probably find a space for them. But yeah, just follow me on Instagram. That's kind of where I'm going to be posting that stuff. And, uh, yeah, you can always direct message me on Instagram, but I'll always post any upcoming shows there.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and definitely check out Brooke's website. She has, she upgraded it right around the time that our show opened. So there's some really great documentation about her piece, as well as some of the other things that she's done. And I think we're gonna wrap up on this question, which is really beautiful. So this person asks, I love how your subversive quilting has so many parallels with the root system of trees and how there's a free form yet systematic aspect to them. If roots can communicate with one another, how would you say the process of quilting informed the way you communicate with yourself and others?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think I think what I like about the process of quilting is it's very direct. You can see everything the closer you look. Like nothing's hidden. You can see every stitch. You can see, every line, every cut. And I think, what was cool about not just the roots but the grasses is like I think when you think about survival and survival in a community-based setting, we really do have to communicate with each other. And I think for me, quilting, it's a very direct medium. Um, I'm a textile person. I love being around fabric. I love being enveloped in fabric. Like, I had a very dysfunctional and at times abusive upbringing, but I remember being like tucked in really tight, as a kid and being just like swaddled in fabric. And so I think there's something about specifically the quilted rooms that recreates that for me. And I think others. I don't know if I'm answering this question well. It's a deep question. But yeah, I think it's just as a visual artist, sometimes I don't have words for what I want to communicate. And I think I've found this medium that allows me to connect with other people and allows them to maybe explore things within themselves that I just don't know how to do verbally, if that answers that question.
I mean, I think you answered that beautifully, but it also has a lot to do with one of the reasons why I asked you to create work for this show, because there's a lot of content I'm responsible for that's very objective, right? The botanical science and the things that we know we can show with objects and so forth that are a little more cerebral, but you are so attuned to that psychological and emotional element, and that's also what plants and sounds creates for us, either together or separately. So Charlie mentions that he wishes your talk had been available earlier in the show, but I thought this was a really good time frame in which to do this. We don't have to venture out in our sub-freezing temps today here in St. Louis and you in Providence. So we're able to do this from the coziness of our own homes. Perhaps some of you are in fact wrapped in quilts or very warm fabrics. I'm just so thrilled that you were able to share your work with us, and not only for those of us who are able to see it in person, but to talk about your process, because this is the beautiful part about working with living artists. You are here to tell us why you're doing what you're doing, and you are making it transparent, like you're giving us you're not keeping it secretive. So thank you so much for all of your work and time and creating this exquisite experience for everyone here, and for offering such a great presentation. And we have gone a little bit over time, so I thank everyone for their patience and staying and sticking with us and through the Q&A. Brooke, thank you so much. I'm getting some thank yous in the Q&A box as well. So thank you. The two of us will talk again, but for those of you who joined us, thanks so much for being here. And the remaining 2 talks in the series, there's a link in the chat box if you want to access. Kevin's talk is next Tuesday, and the following Thursday is Annika's talk. So I hope I'll see some of you there too. Thank you all so much. Thanks for being here.
Guys, bye.